Me and Danny hop on here and we tell you how many running backs to draft, when to draft them, hero RB, zero RB, double hero RB. But in today's video, we're going to tell you which running backs we're actually trying to draft right now. The top 20 running back rankings, the pros and cons for each guy, kind of where the tier breaks align, and which guys are kind of interchangeable. So everything that you guys will need to know for like early round running back strategy, you should get from this video in combination with all of the videos we've broken down on the strategy portion of the running back position. So if you enjoyed any point, leave a like, subscribe, tons of support on the channel. Really appreciate that. But with that being said, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And yeah, you've probably heard from other content creators that hitting on the running back position is the key to winning your fantasy championship. And while, of course, we are more running back fragile guys, we do acknowledge that if you hit on a running back and he does hit that ceiling range of outcome, you have a very good chance at possibly having a fantastic fantasy football season. So the order of these running backs, where we select them, and like Corey said, pros and cons. But let's waste no more time and let's get right into it.
All right, so we are now into the video. As you guys can see, these are our top 21 or so running back rankings. And before you go to the comments and yell that we have certain players too low or certain players too high, hear us out to the end of this video. So the first rounders tier, Bijan Robinson, Christian McCaffrey, and Austin Eckler. This tier is players that we would spend a first round draft pick on. For us, Bijan is RB1 because of his high draft capital. The pros for him, obviously, are that he was a high draft capital running back, fresh legs, great offensive line, great scheme. Christian McCaffrey, more of your receiving back, great offense, has a bit of an injury history, but he definitely is still the type of guy that you can anchor your team around. Bijan Robinson, his cons are more so like, running back competition in the backfield, as well as Desmond Ridder and the offense that he plays in. Austin Eckler, great offense, great quarterback, has the ability to really achieve a high receiving ceiling. The only concern with him is kind of, how do the receivers being healthy affect his target share? But for the most part, we expect his touchdowns to still be high, expect his efficiency to still be high. You could take any which one of these running backs as the RB1 off the board, as high as, number 3, number 4 overall.
Yeah, for sure. All of these guys, of course, have their pros and cons. The reason why we're taking them in the first round in the top 10 of our fantasy drafts is because we're weighing the pros rather than the cons. But if you had to pick and choose the order of these three, a lot of you guys at home who have been following FSC for a while will already know the answer to this, but let's take it away with who exactly your running back one is.
Yeah, I mean, Bijan right now, I have him at 4th overall, 3rd overall. Really, if you got some big balls and you want to take him over Tyreek Hill, or maybe you're in a league with running back premiums like our listener league was, or like my home league is, Christian McCaffrey, I would take him as high as 5 overall. So, outside of Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Tyreek Hill, I would take Christian McCaffrey right after those guys and right after Bijan as well. But if you wanted to take him as high as 3rd, as high as 4th overall, I can't blame you too much. The ceiling case is absolutely there for Christian McCaffrey. The only thing I'm a little bit more concerned about the age, the touch workload that he sustained, the injury history over the course of his career. And then Austin Eckler, I do have like a slight bit down from here because I have Stephon Diggs, Travis Kelce, Cooper Kupp, and CeeDee Lamb all ahead of Austin Eckler. He is my 10th overall player. But any major differences there, or you have these guys kind of ranked similarly?
Exact same order. So you mentioned you wouldn't mind if somebody had the take of taking Bijan over Tyreek. I do think in a home league setting, knowing the running back dynamic that you could potentially expect, Bijan Robinson is my 3rd overall player. I want access to that legendary upside, that 25 PPR point per game upside. A little sneak peek of a future video that will be coming to the channel, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But Bijan Robinson is the only running back right now, in my opinion, that can access 25 PPR points per game. I still like Austin Eckler. I still like Christian McCaffrey. I have Christian McCaffrey as my 7th overall player, Austin Eckler as my 10th. But like you alluded to, if you want to take McCaffrey at 4th overall, you want to take Austin Eckler at 6th overall, I don't think that's a bad pick whatsoever, because the way we outlined our tiers is that our 3rd overall player to our 10th overall player is a pretty flat tier this year.
Yeah, hence why we talked about the 3rd and the 4th picks kind of being the worst spots to draft from. So the next tier of running backs that we have here are the 1-2 turn guys. So Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, and Tony Pollard. We kind of have them in a varying order. I believe we both have Barkley at 5, but yep. I have Nick Chubb at 4 and you have Tony Pollard at 4. With Nick Chubb, the pros are very simple. I mean, he might be the best pure runner in the NFL, probably one of the best pure runners in NFL history, realistically, when you look at the numbers. Nick Chubb has a better offense coming to town with Deshaun Watson. Amari Cooper and all those guys around him are going to help move the offense, help get him goal line opportunities. A lot of people will point to the fact now, too, that Kareem Hunt is now gone. Maybe there's some hidden receiving upside that we're looking for with Nick Chubb. I will say, it's like year 7 of his career, year 6 of his career. He's probably not going to suddenly be a 100 target running back, but a marginal uptick in receiving volume is definitely possible. They haven't really added anybody. It looks like it's just going to be Nick Chubb. Maybe Jerome Ford mixes in here and there. So for me, Nick Chubb is my RB4. He's, in my opinion, just the best talent here. And also there's that a little bit of hidden upside that if he sees a bigger receiving workload, and I believe his offense could have the highest ceiling. I think the Cowboys are a safer projection, but if Watson gets back to Watson play, the Browns offense could really be like the breakout offense of 2023. So these guys are all interchangeable. That's like the marginal difference for me. And then, I'll touch on Saquon Barkley and then I'll let you take it away with Tony Pollard as well. With Saquon, the pros are the workload. Of these 3 guys, he actually has the best one, especially as a receiver, 100 target type of upside. The Giants are a little bit sketchy in terms of the projection compared to the Browns and the Cowboys, in our opinion. But Saquon has the big play upside. He has the receiving workload. He has the carry volume. The touchdowns and the red zone work, not quite as strong as these other 2 guys, in my opinion. But with Saquon Barkley, you're getting a very clean projection, a guy that could still finish as a highly, highly decorated fantasy running back, a multi-time top 5 guy so far in his career.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you outlined that with Saquon Barkley because, of course, the early career Saquon Barkley, you had the elite efficiency, you had the elite opportunity share, which is what he showed in that backfield. His rookie season, we still remember what he was able to do from both a rushing and receiving standpoint. I will say I am a little bit more concerned about the efficiency than I've been in years past, simply because of his trend post bye week last year. We saw his efficiency take a slight downtick, down to about 4.11 yards per carry and 3.31 yards per target. But that was also met with over 23 opportunities per game and over 5.5 targets per game. And I do think adding Darren Waller to the fold, last year's New York Giants just simply didn't have enough perimeter talent to buoy this offense. So by the time the bye week rolled around, teams were really realizing, hey, listen, if the Giants are going to move the ball on offense, it's going to be at the hands of a guy like Saquon Barkley. So I do think adding Darren Waller to the fold, having some more versatility in the passing game could affect those efficiency numbers. Regardless, we're nitpicking a guy that we would both feel comfortable taking in the first half of the second round of your draft. So he's my RB5 overall. My RB4 overall, you mentioned Nick Chubb already is your RB4. He's currently my RB6. The reason why I have Tony Pollard at 4 is pretty simple. The only quote-unquote question mark of his profile right now, in my opinion, is whether they bring in a veteran running back, whether he can fully get to the workload levels of guys like Nick Chubb and guys like Saquon Barkley. But he just doesn't really need to in order to pay off massively. He was averaging almost 21 PPR points per game last year on just about 19 opportunities per game once Dak came back in week 7. I do think he's got that elite efficiency combo. You mentioned that Nick Chubb may just be the best running back in terms of efficiency in NFL history. On a per carry basis, Tony Pollard looks like Nick Chubb in terms of the yards per carry, the yards per target, the overall looseness race. Like, he's one of the highest graded running backs in the entire NFL. If the team is able to trust him with some of Ezekiel Elliott's workload, again, I'm not expecting him to take all of the 254 vacated opportunities that Zeke leaves behind. But if he takes a small share of that, if we expect this to be a potential top 5 offense, and we saw his receiving work buoy up to about 4.22 targets per game at the down stretch of last season, he's got all the upside in the world. And I think he is the prime candidate to hit 20, 21 PPR points per game outside of the first round. So I understand from a safe projection standpoint, given the workloads, that Saquon Barkley and Nick Chubb are quote unquote safer backs. But for me, because I'm drafting for ceiling and because I know Tony Pollard, given the efficiency, given the offense, given the potential receiving work, could potentially be a 22 PPR point per game back, I just simply think he has the highest ceiling of all these round 2 guys.
Yeah, and in terms of my ranking, I have Nick Chubb rated right at that 1-2 turn. I have him at 12, 13 area, depending on, him and Garrett Wilson. It's really a toss-up based on format there. Saquon Barkley, I have at 15th overall, and Tony Pollard, I have at 16th overall. So those guys, like you said, kind of that 1-2 turn area early in the second round is exactly where I'd be hoping to draft those guys. I would not draft any of these running backs over Amon-Ra St. Brown, over CeeDee Lamb, if those guys fall on the board, but that just kind of gives you an idea of the tier breaks we have among the wide receivers and the running backs there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned your ranking. So I currently have them all back to back to back. So as I mentioned, Tony Pollard's my RB4. There's really no clear conviction between the 3 because, again, Tony Pollard is my 15th overall player. Saquon Barkley is my 16th and Nick Chubb is my 17th. The wide receivers, I just have a little bit more pushed up for you, hence the micro difference in our rankings.
Yeah, for me, I have some question marks about Devontae Adams and AJ Brown in terms of overall pass volume for AJ Brown, and then offensive production for Devontae Adams. So I think I would probably just lean, especially in a home league where running backs are going to fly off the board and you kind of want to get one early. I would just lean with those running backs over those 2 guys specifically. So the next tier of running backs is kind of like the uncertainty tier. the 2-3 turn guys, Jonathan Taylor, who of course appears to be on the trade block according to the Indianapolis Colts, Josh Jacobs, who's still currently holding out right now, and then Derrick Henry, who obviously at 29, almost 30 years old, has a lot of touches under his belt, but I mean, he's still Derrick Henry. He's still the king. He didn't really show off any, signs of decline. The pros for these guys are very simple. I mean, Jonathan Taylor's the RB1 just 2 years ago. He's extremely talented. Saw a little bit of an uptick actually in receiving workload last year. And we know, those long touchdowns, that red zone work, that is his bread and butter. The offense in Indianapolis was 31st in scoring last year. Hence why, along with his own injuries, he was a big time disappointment from that first overall pick. Josh Jacobs, third running back in overall fantasy production last year, but the Raiders were 12th in scoring, right? And as much as, at face value, Derek Carr and Jimmy Garoppolo, it's not that big of a difference. Are they going to be a top 12 offense in scoring again? That is a pretty lofty projection for an offense that I would say probably projects more in like the 20 to 25 range. So unless Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams can carry this offense like they did last year, that's my major concern with Josh Jacobs. But the workload's there, the efficiency's there. He's obviously a very talented player. And as I mentioned for Derrick Henry, very talented, very big, very, going to get a lot of volume and that kind of thing. But the offensive production is definitely a concern. I think of the three, he has the worst offensive line and potentially, Ryan Tannehill is a good quarterback, but we don't know how much this offense is going to score, especially with Burks' injury. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins is over the hill. There's a little bit more offensive concerns. And honestly, all of these guys have offensive concerns, but Henry's are the ones I'm most scared for.
Yeah, I would agree because, I mean, obviously you'd make the argument that Derrick Henry at a pure talent level, like he may just be one of the top 10 running backs of all time, in all honesty. Like there's a very real chance that because of his Hall of Fame pedigree, he could potentially keep churning on like he's done in these last few years. But as you outlined with the running back touch and age apex, he's not the youngest tool in the shed right now. He's 29 years old with the workload he has under his belt. So that's already a concern. And like you said, the situational factors here, it's not like we're looking at the same Tennessee Titans that were winning 12, 13 games every single year these past few years. Like this is a Tennessee Titans team that is probably going to be fighting for 7 or 8 wins at the best case scenario. So if that offensive success as a whole is on the decline, if the team success, maybe they're not in as run heavy type of scripts like we've seen in the past, those are the concerns I have for Derrick Henry. So if he's at the 2-3 turn, like we said, we would be willing to take the plunge on him just because he's a Hall of Fame talent. And if he gets off to a hot start, we think that the tradability is going to be there given the name value. But he's not somebody I'd be rushing up my board to take amongst the likes of the guys we have above them, like the Tony Pollard, the Saquon Barkley, the Nick Chubb, where he might go in a lot of your guys' home league. So if he's going at, again, the 202, 203, 204 in your home league, I would fade him at that cost. But once he starts slipping, you have Justin Jefferson, grab an elite quarterback, and you want Derrick Henry to anchor your running back core. I don't think he's a bad spot there. I have him at 8th overall, Jonathan Taylor at 9, Josh Jacobs at 7, respectively. You know what? I'll just let you get into the pros and cons about Jonathan Taylor, your 7th overall running back.
Yeah, I mean, I think JT, because the biggest question marks we have about him are due to this like trade scenario as well. And especially if you guys are having your drafts, or maybe you've already had your draft, there's a possibility that this whole like Indianapolis situation doesn't matter anymore if he goes to a better team. Miami Dolphins, some of the teams that have been reported, apparently there's been 6 teams interested. 2 teams have made an offer, according to Ian Rappaport. JT has a lot of outs. And for me, I think he has the highest ceiling because he's still young. He's still in his prime. Didn't have like a massive touch workload like Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry did last year. And there's the biggest upside there from like a big play, long touchdown, and potentially maybe even a little bit of an uptick in the receiving game as well. So for me, in terms of my overall rankings, the way that it kind of separates itself is that the Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Tony Pollard tier, they're all kind of intertwined for me with your Amon-Ra, Devontae Adams, AJ Brown type of wide receivers. And then in between those guys, I have all 3 of the top quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts. I would draft all 3 of them before I spent a draft pick on Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, or Derrick Henry. But I do have Jonathan Taylor at 21. So I would be willing to spend a second rounder on him. And then I have Jacobs at 25, Derrick Henry at 26 with Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle, and Mark Andrews kind of in between those guys. So for me, 2-3 turn is exactly where I'm looking to pick these guys. If you guys are playing in a home league, you don't want to have to risk going into the dead zone for your running backs or whatever. And like Danny said, maybe you pick Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson in the first round. One of these guys is staring you in the face at the 2-3 turn. I think they're viable picks. Make sure you get yourself a lockdown running back and you could run a pretty solid hero RB with those guys.
Yeah, the only micro difference I have is I have Calvin Ridley at 21, Jalen Waddle at 22. But in the order I have them, I have Josh Jacobs as my 23rd overall player, Derrick Henry as my 25th, and 26th overall is Jonathan Taylor. Like the Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley tier, there's not really much conviction here because I do see the pros and cons, of course, of all three of these running backs. I do think they're appropriately tiered together. So I'll just quickly make the case in terms of Josh Jacobs. The reason why I have him as the RB1 of this group is simply due to the fact that he has the most receiving volume of this group. So if we saw last year, the past 2 years, he was able to command 64 targets on that Raiders offense. In addition to the fact that his workload on the ground last year in particular was just as high as we've seen from Jonathan Taylor. Maybe not Derrick Henry, because I mean, when he was in his prime, he was a threat to get 26 carries per game. But we saw last year that Josh Jacobs down the stretch was averaging over 26 opportunities per game and over 24 PPR points per game. Now, of course, I expect a downtick. I don't expect the Raiders to ride him over 26 opportunities per game. Maybe that cuts down to 21, 22, and maybe the PPR points per game don't enter the 24 range, but I think he can flirt with 19, 20 PPR points per game, finish as, a high to mid-end running back one, and really pay off at this ADP. We mentioned that when we're in the second round, when we're in the first round, the 25 PPR point per game outlook is what we're craving, is what we're looking for. But when you're on the 2-3 turn and you have Justin Jefferson aboard your team, I think getting access to a running back that can finish as the running back 2, that can finish as the running back 3 overall in fantasy points per game, like Josh Jacobs last year, is very valuable. So for me, I do have him here. I think he's honestly, based off last year, just as good of a talent at this point as those other two are. Maybe you guys might disagree in the comment section, but I think he's proven himself. I mean, the efficiency metrics were there, the volume was there, and I do think out of this group, in my opinion, he's got the safest offensive projection. Now, if Anthony Richardson booms, I think that could be the case for Jonathan Taylor, but in terms of median projection, like, you kind of know what Jimmy G is going to bring. I think he's a less volatile option than what Derek Carr was last year, and even if the offense is slightly worse, I still think the engine of this entire team will run through Josh Jacobs on the offensive perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. The 3-4 turn area, we have 4 running backs rated here, and for the love of God, we wanted to rate these guys over Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, and Derrick Henry. We just simply can't. The cons are a little stronger for these guys, but I would argue that the pros for some of these players might actually be higher than some of the guys that we just talked about. Breece Hall, of course, the legendary upside king. We are going to talk about him in, probably 2 days from now. You guys are going to see that video. And Breece Hall's legendary upside case is very simple. He was a phenomenal rookie talent last year. He had elite receiving upside. He now has Aaron Rodgers come in to buoy this offense up and, propel them to potentially a top 10 unit. The big problem is that now he has Dalvin Cook to compete for touches with early on in the season, and he's coming off of a blown ACL. So his cons are definitely outweighing his pros to some degree. At one point in the offseason, we had him ranked ahead of, some of these guys, Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, and that kind of thing. But now with the Dalvin Cook addition, he just has to slide down a little bit. He's more of a 3-4 turn type of guy than he is a 2-3 turn type of guy. Ramondre Stevenson, I'm less concerned for him because of, Zeke being more washed than Dalvin Cook. But I will say Ramondre Stevenson's in probably the worst offense of this group. So he kind of gets, downticked there. But he also might have one of the higher receiving volume upticks that we've seen. He was just a second-year running back last year, and he commanded top 5 targets at that position, and that's extremely, extremely encouraging. So he still has a relatively safe, low-end RB1, mid RB1 type of projection, in my opinion. Travis Etienne, we're concerned with the offensive situation in terms of the workload split. We know that the Jags are going to be a good team. We know that they're going to score a lot of points, but how much does Tank Bigsby factor in? Does Travis Etienne ever, realize the high-end receiving upside that we saw for him coming out of Clemson? And then Jahmyr Gibbs, probably early down carries and goal line work will elude him a little bit, but he could get there on the basis of 100+ targets. He was the 12th overall pick in the draft. Obviously, they're going to use him at a heavy amount. So the pros and cons are mixed for these guys. I have all of these guys basically ranked back to back to back. I have Breece Hall at 27. I have Ramondre Stevenson at 28. A slight mini tier of Devontae Smith and T. Higgins between the next two guys, Travis Etienne and Jahmyr Gibbs. All of these players are inside my top 32. So I actually view them at the 3-4 turn as slight values. I think they're all basically mid-third round type of projections.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny you mentioned how they're kind of all like junked together for you. So like I mentioned, Jonathan Taylor is my 26th overall player, Chris Olave 27, T. Higgins 28, Devontae Smith 29, and then Lamar Jackson 30. And then these 4 running backs just completely ripped off like a Band-Aid in my rankings. 31 overall is Travis Etienne, 32 Breece Hall, 33 Ramondre, and 34 Jahmyr Gibbs. The reason why I have Travis Etienne as the top of this group is simply because I think this is going to be the best offense, and I think he's the most efficient player of this entire group. You can make the argument that a healthy Breece Hall would challenge him for that, but with Travis Etienne, we saw last year what he was able to do on the ground. over 5.1 yards per carry. What we saw what he was able to do in the receiving game, over 7 yards per target. Now, the receiving work is a question mark because I expected him to be much more involved than he was last year. And I think it has somewhat to do with Trevor Lawrence's tendencies as a quarterback, not checking it down, obviously having a very strong slot receiver in Christian Kirk, obviously a strong tight end last year with Evan Ingram, that he didn't really feel the need to involve his backs in the receiving game. So I guess that is some type of concern. However, I do think the red zone efficiency is something that can go way up because last year, it almost seemed like Travis Etienne was cursed from being able to score touchdowns. I mean, he had so many chances inside the 10-yard line, inside the 5-yard line to punch one in, and he simply wasn't able to get the job done. Yeah, if he ends up struggling in the early portion of the season, I could see Tank Bigsby working into that load. But if he starts out and shows, hey, that was just a fluke, man. I'm the same elite efficiency running back that I am between the 20s that I can be inside the 10-yard line. If he starts showing off, first week, second week, third week, that he can convert those looks into touchdowns, the upside here is massive. I think the upside here could potentially be this year's Tony Pollard.
Yeah, it's really odd. It all depends on kind of what you value. If you value like the weighted opportunities per game, ETN, a little bit more competition on the goal line, a little bit more competition in the receiving game. Jahmyr Gibbs, he's the weighted opportunity darling because, targets are worth like 2.5 times more than a carry. But again, he's not going to get that goal line work. Ramondre Stevenson is the slowest, like physically, of this group. He's not going to have those breakaway plays that Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, and Jahmyr Gibbs are going to have. And then Breece Hall is the biggest injury question mark about these guys. So throw them into a hat. Whatever you care about most is kind of like the guy that I would go with. If you are so concerned with Breece Hall's injury, then favor, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, and Jahmyr Gibbs. If you don't want to draft a rookie, favor the other guys. If you don't want a guy that's not going to break off long touchdowns and win you weeks, don't draft Ramondre Stevenson. If you want a guy that's the workhorse of his backfield, don't draft Travis Etienne. It's really all kind of your flavor. These four guys are more efficiency bets than the guys ahead of them, right? Jacobs, Taylor, Henry, these guys are workload bets. The other guys behind them are more so like efficiency and weighted opportunity type of guys.
Well, like you said, do you prefer ketchup? Do you prefer, barbecue? Do you prefer original? Like, what's your favorite chip flavor? Because at the end of the day, when you're at this 3-4 turn, you want to take one or two of these guys and operate a modified hero or double hero RB. I think that's a viable strategy because I do think, of course, all four of these guys present upside in their own way. So if you're at the 11th overall pick and you start out CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown and you want to take one or two of these guys on that next turn, I think that'd be a very viable start because I do think these guys profile ahead of the next guys we'll talk about, which are the dead zone running backs.
Yeah, and speaking of the dead zone running backs, I will say, I think that there's going to be more value in the dead zone this year than there was even last year. And we saw Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, and James Conner of the 12 dead zone running backs pay off big time at ADP. But the other 9 dead zone running backs did not pay off at ADP. So you got to keep that in mind. Just because Josh Jacobs was good in the dead zone last year, there was 9 backs that were not. So the dead zone hit rates are definitely real, and they're not something that we want to invest in. But if I had to say these dead zone running backs, and there's probably a couple more that we didn't even talk about, Pacheco, Rashad White, Miles Sanders, those type of guys, they just rank a little bit lower for us. Who are your favorite two of this group?
Yeah, so, we talked about it before we got into the show. There's 4 guys we all like over here at FSC, but the 2 I will pick are Dameon Pierce and Javonte Williams. I'll start with Dameon Pierce. Obviously, the pros are talented rookie running back, really showed that he can command that full workload in Houston last year, especially down the stretch. Very elusive, breaks tackles, can run between the tackles. He's like your prototypical like boomer running back where everybody's 55-year-old dad will watch Dameon Pierce run the ball, truck someone over and just say, yo, he can play. And he sometimes honestly fantasy is just as simple as getting guys that can just flat out play the game. Of course, it's going to matter where you're getting him. If you're taking Dameon Pierce in the 4th round, that's a little ugly. But if he's falling, maybe you're in a more wide receiver piss boy type of room and he wants to fall to late round 5, early round 6, and you take him there, I do think he's a talented enough player to be able to take. Also worth noting, the biggest question mark I had was with Devin Singletary coming in, like would he eat into some of the receiving workload? I know he's been a historically inefficient running back in that game, but given his stature, we do see teams tend to just see a 5'8", 200-pound back and throw him into that situation. Well, according to every beat reporter in Houston, it doesn't really seem the case. They brought in Devin Singletary as insurance to Dameon Pierce because the team believes that Dameon Pierce can handle that 3-down workload. So I just moved him up. He's my running back 16 overall right now. And he's somebody that if I want to deviate in the dead zone for a player that I just think is flat out good and can pay off at this spot, I think Dameon Pierce is that guy. And the other guy is kind of like the inverse of Dameon Pierce, where Dameon Pierce doesn't exactly have like the highest ceiling, but he has a good projectable workload. My guy's Javonte Williams, and we saw what he was able to do in those first few weeks last year, a guy that we were telling everybody and their mothers to draft in the second round last year. Unfortunately for us, we didn't really get to see how that would have resulted. Obviously, in week 3, suffers that knee injury despite a strong start, especially in his workload, receiving work, elite efficiency on the ground. Every single factor you can possibly envision for a strong fantasy football running back, he had in spades. The big elephant in the room, of course, is going to be that knee injury. But the fact that he's already fast tracking, the fact that he already appeared in preseason game number 2 is all encouraging factors for Javonte Williams. And this is someone that I think the main consensus hasn't caught up to quite yet. I still routinely see him going in round 7 and round 8 on Underdog. And he's a guy I have currently inside of my top 60. So I understand the concerns. If people are saying, you know what, I'm worried about the knee, it's not the risk I want to take, that's fine. But for me, he is the running back in this range that I think can flat out win you your league.
21 targets in those first 3 games he had last year. We're talking about a guy who had 7 targets per game. It's a small sample size, but if Sean Payton can, make this offense go again, they were literally the worst scoring offense in the NFL last year. Like you said, Javonte, he's fast tracking all of his dates, and he is getting back to, full speed. And Dameon Pierce, for what it's worth, played 3% of his snaps on long down and distance and third downs and fourth downs last year, played every single one of the first 4, long down and distance, third down and fourth down snaps in that second preseason game. And he got the night off in the first preseason game. So we're kind of seeing, again, it's not going to be a good offense. They have a rookie quarterback, but could he be like the new Chris Carson? He runs like Chris Carson. My comp for him was Chris Carson. It's not as good of an offense as Chris Carson played in, but I do think that's kind of the projection. Low end RB1, mid RB2 is like the range of outcomes. That's a very tight range of outcomes. He's probably not going to finish worse than that. And if you guys are just trying to not miss in the dead zone, I think he's one of the best guys to go after.
Yep.
Same goes, in my opinion, for Kenneth Walker. I already talked about Kenneth Walker as somebody I think could get out to a fast start with rookie running back Zach Charbonnet coming onto the fold and into the scene. We have Kenneth Walker who's going into his second year, who should take a big time uptick in his workload. Usually, we see second round rookie running backs take a while to get acclimated to the NFL, and not only that, we've also usually seen them behind dusty ass veterans like James Conner types and David Montgomery types. Like we don't usually see them behind talented, exciting, probably would be going in the second round if it wasn't for the Charbonnet pick type of guys like Kenneth Walker. So for me, I think he can get out to a quick start. They have an easy schedule at the beginning of the year. All those receivers on the outside draw attention away from Kenneth Walker. He was number 1 in the NFL in terms of percentage of his team's goal line carries. Got every single one last year in the inside the 5-yard line. So Kenneth Walker, a guy that I think is extremely exciting in the dead zone, 5th, 6th round especially. If he goes at the end of round 3, like he will in some home leagues, definitely don't take him that high. But if he's there at the 4-5 turn, that's where I start to become interested in him. And then J.K. Dobbins, again, more of an upside swing, high bust potential, I'm not going to lie, but he could absolutely crush because he was a great prospect. He has a 3-down capability. He has 4.3 speed. He could break off long touchdowns. He's great in the red zone. One of the most efficient running backs in the NFL, yards per carry, yards per touch wise, since he's entered the league, despite last year playing with one knee. J.K. Dobbins has the ability to potentially be a 60 to 70% opportunity share running back for one of the best rushing offenses in the NFL. And Lamar Jackson's going to draw away, players, and he's going to maybe take away some red zone work and that kind of thing. I think a lot of people will have a lot of semantic kind of, takes about J.K. Dobbins, about his, target competition and, backfield competition and that kind of thing. But the bottom line is he's a great running back who can do it on all 3 downs, who has breakaway speed in a great offense. And if he shows that he's healthy and if he's obviously trying to play for a contract right now, that could be a big time motivating factor for him. And we saw last year, Miles Sanders left for dead. Nobody wanted him in fantasy and he played himself into a big contract, and J.K. Dobbins could absolutely do the same thing.
It's funny that both of your guys relatively are, very similar player types where very efficient running backs can get it between the tackles, obviously explosive runs out of the wazoo. The con, of course, of Kenneth Walker is that he's sharing his backfield. The con, of course, of J.K. Dobbins is the knee injury, the potential holdout we saw earlier in the preseason, though I don't think that's going to flare up during the season. Both these guys, I just think it's kind of undeniable that they are talented running backs given the efficiency metrics they've shown. And typically, if you're going to beat the dead zone, it's usually going to be with a talented running back rather than the running back we're propping up solely because of the expected workload.
So I'll just rattle off the dead zone guys that we're not interested in. Najee Harris is a workload play. He's not very talented. He hasn't been efficient. And not only that, but Jaylen Warren has eked into his workload a little bit. Am I worried that Jaylen Warren's going to take over the backfield? Not necessarily, but I do think that Najee Harris needs 80-90% of the opportunities to be a back-end RB1, which, by the way, is his ceiling. He's not going to finish any higher than that. And in the dead zone, unknown. He could still get injured, blah, blah, blah. I probably am not investing into a guy like Najee Harris. Aaron Jones, 29 years old. I mean, he's an efficiency darling, and he has been his whole career. But with no Aaron Rodgers, I'm a little bit concerned about that. Joe Mixon, I wanted to leave him off this entirely because I have him ranked at 23, so he's not even in my top 20.
He's my
but
20.
Just to appease some of you guys in the comments, I think he's washed. I think he's done for. I think as the season goes along, we're going to see some of the backups work in more into his workload. Maybe they sign somebody mid-season. I've seen people make the case. It's like, oh, well, if they didn't believe in him, they would have signed more veterans and that kind of thing. I don't think so. I think they know that their passing game is the way that they're going to win championships. The running back position is the least important position on the field, and Joe Mixon could get the job done for what they need him to do. So as the season goes along, I promise you Joe Mixon's going to lose out on work. And then DeAndre Swift, when he falls to like the round 7, round 8 area, like I've seen him, fall on underdog, and I got him in the 8th round of our listener league draft, I'm okay with him there. But when he goes in round 4, round 5, because he's the starting Eagles running back, then I'm not okay with him because he still has injury concerns. We still have, backfield split type of concerns, but he was the only Eagles running back to get the night off in preseason week 2, which tells me that at least, he can be like a 50 to 60% opportunity share guy like we saw from Miles Sanders, only with a better receiving outlook.
Yeah, I think you pretty much outlined the case for those guys. And in terms of where you guys want to know where we have them in our rankings. So in order that I have these guys would be Kenneth Walker at 54, J.K. Dobbins 55, Dameon Pierce 56, and Javonte 57. Again, not much separation between those guys. Najee Harris is my 62nd overall player. And then finally, Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, and DeAndre Swift, respectively, are 66, 67, and 68 for me.
Yeah, that's fair. I have Kenneth Walker at 45, J.K. Dobbins at 46, Najee Harris at 50, Dameon Pierce at 57, Javonte Williams at 58, Aaron Jones at 64, DeAndre Swift at 69. Nice. And then Isaiah Pacheco and Cam Akers kind of close out this area for me of the dead zone. And then I have Joe Mixon all the way down at 77, down there with Alexander Madison, another guy who's propped up as a bad running back, being elevated by his situation at 79. So that's kind of how the whole like top 24-ish landscape of the running back position plays out for us. Again, make sure to check out our Hero RB strategy video, our Zero RB running back strategy video, and our Double Hero RB running back strategy video. If you guys enjoyed this video at any point, go down below, smash the like button, hammer it, subscribe to the channel if you guys got some value from this video and you are new around here. About 81% of you in the last 28 days on the back end are not subscribed to the channel. Let's go ahead and fix that. I promise you guys, we will help you win your championships this year. And if you want our draft guide, if you want all of our rankings, all that good stuff, you can get it completely for free by signing up on Underdog with just $10, which you can then win money with using the promo code FSE, our weekly rankings, and our draft guide totally for free. So even if you've already had your draft, our weekly rankings will be free to you to help you with your start-sit decisions throughout the entirety of the season. That is available, linked down below in the pinned comment and in the description. If you already have an Underdog account, or if you can't play in the state that you're in, then you can also get our draft guide and our weekly rankings throughout the season on flockfantasy.com. Use the promo code FSE over there for 30% off. And you'll also get first priority to Dynasty decisions, a free Zoom consult when you sign up annually, all that good stuff. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.